Sumeru, the region widely considered as the first great art conquest, and for good reason. The lore was intricate, characters lovable, storyline interesting, and full of surprising twists to keep players on their toes. At least, that was my perspective on it. Since it was never really unchallenged, I never thought to reconsider. And then it was challenged. Recently, I put out a video talking about why Inazuma was the worst region, which I still stand on. But in that video, I got a lot of comments saying that Sumeru was worse, that it was long and boring. At first, I dismissed this as some kind of hate, but the sheer amount of that opinion I got was honestly quite surprising. So I got curious to see if these arguments held water under close inspection. Today, I'm going to take an objective look at Sumeru, specifically the pacing. I'll do my best in removing my personal biases here and just state the facts. Now that the Sumeru hype is long gone, it's time to look back and ask ourselves, was Sumeru really that good? Let's find out, shall we? As always, please remember to like and sub. I make a bunch of videos like this one analyzing the story of Genshin Impact, so if that topic interests you, be sure to turn on your notifications so you never miss an upload. Anyway, enough from me, let's get into the analysis. Obviously, spoilers for all of Sumeru, so I really wouldn't recommend watching this until you've done the quest. Because, seriously, it's 10 times better when you're doing it blind. We start off, as always, by arriving in Sumeru. We run into a scholar who supposedly ignores us. Upon following her, we stumble into a cave where she's doing LCDs, and we pass out. We hallucinate a large, slowly withering tree, and then reawaken in Gandharvaville with Kale and Tainari. Tainari explains what Hypatia was on. Unfortunately, it wasn't the good stuff, but it was an incense called Spirit Boreal used for meditation. Tainari says our vision of the tree was a hallucination, but the traveler is skeptical. Even so, we don't voice these thoughts because they're taking care of us. The next day, we join Kale on the patrol and learn about the culture of Sumeru. While we're joking around with Kale, Paimon accidentally triggers a trauma response, and she retreats to her room. We find out about Kale's Elazar and the withering of Irminsul from Tainari, and he admits that no, our hallucination wasn't a hallucination, but a vision. We go back to Hypatia to deliver her some food. We learn more about how only children dream in Sumeru. When we get back to Gandharvaville, Tainari is personally being asked by a sage to take part in some big project. Tainari refuses, and we find out that this is a repeated effort. After goodbye to Kale, though, we make our way to the city. Okay, summary over. While this section took an hour plus, I'd argue it was entirely necessary. There was a lot of information and setup given for the nation, most of it essential to the later quests. While it might have felt longer in practice, pacing it out like this made it easier to digest. The downtime was well executed, having it spent with Kale and Tainari to connect us to them. However, I could also see where the Sumeru hate army had a point. While this was definitely a solid quest and it makes up a good part of the story, it's not the only part, but a third. This section honestly feels like it should have been its own thing, and it is, and there's room for players to step back here. But the problem is how it's being treated as one long quest. Within this section, we also meet Dea and Dunyarzad and Nilou. We go to Alhislam for the auction and such. All these individual sections are incredibly paced and written. The way 3 major plot points are forced together can feel endless. While this almost definitely wasn't Hoyo's intended effect, it came across as dragging along. I took snack/phone breaks in between the 3 parts during this rewatch, and I found myself enjoying these parts way more. I have some theories as to why that is, but this happens a few more times throughout the story, so I'll come back with those examples. So now the Sub-Zero's Festival. I have mixed feelings here. I genuinely love the concept. I remember going into it on my first playthrough, excitedly uncovering the mystery of the time loop. To slowly realize the repeating day feels like scenes straight out of movies I used to watch. But the second time, absolutely not. I'll admit the shame, I gave up and I watched the summary just because it was so dull. Perhaps the problem with this is just how long it took. I agree that it probably could have been sped up a little, but there are problems with that too. Hoyo does a decent job of striking the balance between repetitive mystery and just repetitive, but there gets to a point where you have to wonder if 2 hours is too much for a quest. But you can just take breaks, you say, to which I agree. If you were bored in most other quests, you're free to set down your device and step away for a bit. Not with this quest. You have to one-shot it. Not everyone has the time or patience for that. Please don't attack me for this, I genuinely love this quest. But it's not perfect, and it goes so slowly until the end, where it suddenly goes super fast. In my mind, the Sub-Zero's Festival was the epitome of amazing potential, decent execution. Is it the worst thing to happen to Genshin ever? No, absolutely not. Is it bad? Not that either. It's just a quest that overstays its welcome a half hour too long. Also, the cutscene with the Dream City is low-key one of my favorites in the game, just based on how pretty it is. Act 3. Act 3 was genuinely pretty good, similar to Act 1. But similar to Act 1, it had the same problems. We start by meeting up with Nahida Catherine at the Adventurers Guild. Nahida says we should recruit a spy within the academia, and we decide on the Grand Sage's assistant, Sataria. Sataria is picked because she was originally from the desert and has a guilty conscience due to her actions hurting the people of the desert. After learning how to behave with her favorite vendors, we possess them and pretend to be emissaries of King Deshret, bringing her problems to the forefront so she can no longer avoid them. By preying on this weakness, we have her bring us documents from the academia for information. If she does this, we tell her she will have atoned for her sins against the people of the desert. When it's time for the meetup, though, we find that Sataria has had a listening device on her, and Notori has set a trap for us. Nahida exposes herself, protecting us, and we flee. Thinking Tainari might know something of the project, due to the sages wanting to be in on it, we go to Gandharvaville, then to Pardes Di, where we run into Hypatia. She tells us she's ascended into the next stage of her training and made contact with the divine. She tries to show her vision to us, and we see Skara's backstory instead. Turns out, she's gone insane, and Tainara brought her here to care for her. As we try to leave Pardes Di, though, the Eremites hired by Dotori attack us and stab Nahida's vessel. She swaps bodies with us to save herself, and we find ourselves in the sanctuary of Sarasana, where we catch a glimpse of Skara's mech. When we return to our body, we find that Nahida has been imprisoned thoroughly, and it's up to us to save her. For now, though, we decide to flee to the desert. The problem with this section, again, is where it splits. This feels like the perfect time to end Act 3. We've had a whole arc and are now moving into the next major location of the story. But it doesn't. Meet with Alhaitham again, meet Sino for the first time, and run into Dia to learn about the missing village keeper's plotline. As we decide to ask around for the village keepers, only then does the third act end, in the middle of a random plot point. So why, Hoyo? I literally have no idea why they decided to split them at these spots. If you guys have any ideas, please let me know. I'm genuinely lost here. I'm just going to skim Acts 4 and 5 since I want to get the analysis, and after these problems I mentioned, the pacing is actually really good. My only complaint is that there should have been a few more breaks in Act 5, or something with the story focus mode in Wuwa. The game literally warns you, hey, you're about to start something where you're going to have to be here a while. Not to make this a Genshin vs. Wuwa comparison, because I really don't want to get into that can of worms, but I really think that's a good feature Genshin should add. So, to summarize Act 4, we figure that the mad scholars make contact with the divine, and the sages want to harvest their knowledge to make divine knowledge to power Skara's mech. We stop that scheme and uncover the truth of the whole Rukkhadevata vs. King Deshret thing. After that, we devise a plan to free Nahida, do that, fight Skara, and done. Okay, analysis of the pacing. So while I'll admit the transition is pretty seamless between Acts 3 and 4, this can also be a problem. I mentioned earlier about how I found it more enjoyable when I took breaks, and this is my theory as to why that is. Sumeru treats the story like one never-ending sequence, which, yeah, it's a story, so it would do that. But in a video game like this is almost to its detriment. Let me explain. When you're reading a book, there are often regular, usually short intervals you can pause it if you need to put it down. Chapters. These are usually 20 to 30 pages, sometimes longer or shorter, but you get the point. Spots where if you're tired or it's late, etc., you can stop and come back and it won't interrupt the story flow. Genshin doesn't have this, or rather doesn't do it very well. While Sumeru is split into 5 acts, each act is treated as a chapter in a book. Perhaps due to influence from Inazuma or from the other shorter quests, the game trains us to one-shot each quest, especially because we aren't given an exact time frame on how long the quest will take. Because the game hasn't clearly set the boundary, okay, now's when to stop. The player has to break their own immersion to decide that for themselves. But most players don't even do that. You can actually see the Sumeru Archon quest trying to chunk up each section for the player, but it's done in the form of the wait 2 days mechanic, which just feels longer due to us having to move the clock and wait for it to turn and blah 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 whatnot. I definitely felt this wondering, especially during Acts 1 and 3, when it would end, even though the story was really good. I was excited to take a break more so than to keep playing. To offer some sort of solution, maybe Genshin could add a timer or something in the quest menu, giving a general estimate of how long each section will take. That way busy players or players who burn out faster can better map their time and chunk the sections into something that works for them. The game suddenly suggesting, hey, let's take a 2-day break isn't enough. Perhaps an on-screen prompt like at the beginning of each act can work too. Not as big, obviously, but a little text box signaling the start of a new gameplay chunk. These aren't the best solutions in the world, obviously, so if you have any ideas of your own, please let me know in the comments. So, was Sumeru too long? No. Was it paced well? Also no. But before you all attack me, I'm not saying that Sumeru is bad. Personally, I like it even more than Fontaine, which I also love. But just because it's good does not bring it above criticism. Sumeru was the sign of Genshin's stories becoming more complex and obviously longer. So obviously there's an adjustment period, and a bit of grace is necessary. I think Fontaine did a much better job on this, mainly just having one major plot point be the focus of each act, so it flows way better. Hopefully with more experience, Natlon will be even better. So what'd you think? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you liked this video, then check out the description for my video essays playlist and make sure to subscribe. Please. I rewatched all of Sumeru and I can feel my soul corroding in my body. Anyway, I won't keep you too much longer. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you are, and hope to see you in the next one.